let's go ahead and get started today. I see we have a bunch of people still joining, which is excellent. I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar. The webinar is titled Advancing Methodologies with author, speaker, and researcher Dr. John Creswell. This webinar is presented as part of our Sage Talk series, connecting you to influential authors one webinar at a time. So before we begin, we have a quick poll we'd like you to take. We are curious to know, how would you describe the orientation of your methodological skill set? We'll give you just a minute to answer that poll on the screen in front of you. I know some of you may feel like more than one answer applies. This kind of information is always helpful to us. Helps us to get to know our audience. Give you just another minute to answer. What do we have here? Wow, we've got a great mix of folks today. Looks like the highest percentage for qualitatively oriented. Well, this kind of information is always really helpful as we go into the presentation. It helps us to get to know who's on the other line. So thank you for answering those questions. All right, I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today. John Creswell is a professor of family medicine and co-director of the Michigan Mixed Methods program at the University of Michigan. He has authored numerous articles and 27 books on mixed methods research, qualitative research, and research design. While at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, he held the Clifton Endowed Professor Chair, served as director of a mixed methods research office, and founded the Sage Journal, the Journal of Mixed Methods Research. Today's webinar will run about 45 minutes, and we're recording it and archiving it for future viewing. We'll be sending out a link to view that recording in the coming weeks. If you have any problems with audio or viewing mode during the webinar, please use the Q&A box at the right of your screen, and one of our team members will get back to you ASAP. In today's discussion, John Creswell will discuss the development and future of research design, qualitative research, and mixed methods research. After his presentation, we have time for Q&A, so please use that Q&A box to ask any questions to our speaker throughout the webinar. We'll also have the questions that you submitted when you registered. Please also take note of the webinar hashtag, SageTalks, and feel free to ask questions and have conversations on Twitter. So, without further ado, I'll pass it over to author John Creswell. Welcome, John.
Welcome, everybody. So now I'm going to go through my slides, and I really appreciate your joining this conversation, especially people from around the world that may have gotten up in the middle of the night to listen to all of this. But I'm going to talk a little bit about myself as a developing methodologist over the years and how I see methodologies have evolved. I want to be sure and save time for some questions towards the end. Okay, so basically, I was trained back in the 1970s in quantitative research through my master's and doctoral program. And then I began teaching qualitative research by 1985, and by the late 1980s, I started thinking about how quantitative and qualitative research could come together. And in 1994, Sage published this book, Research Design, Qualitative and Quantitative Approaches. It was extremely popular when this came out. And I know I had some features in there that may have been appealing to people, such as the use of bullets in this, and also the concise nature of my ideas, perhaps, and also that it seemed to span different levels of education, such as from undergraduate training to more graduate training. So let's go to the next slide. And so my overall story is that I developed as a writer through the years, and I began to incorporate book writing into my classroom teaching by the 1985 period, and then was continually learning new methodologies. And I've even begun to shift across different fields, first working in education and the social sciences, and now onto the health sciences where I'm in the Department of Family Medicine. Next. So talking a little bit about my development as a writer, in the latest edition of my research design book, I co-authored that with my son, David Creswell. There's a chapter 4 called Writing Strategies and Ethical Considerations. And it's in that particular book that I have incorporated all my favorite writing books, such as the one on the far right, How to Write Like a Pro by Barry Tarshish, and the one right next to it by Ross Larson on how to edit yourself. And as I've written my books over the years, I've always had a trade book or a book on writing skills that I'm reading, and I'm trying to incorporate the ideas actively into my textbooks that I'm writing. Next slide. So one thing that I've done over the years too is to really generate my books out of my teaching. Here's the syllabus, for example, for my introductory qualitative research class. And in this class, I would write a chapter in one of my qualitative books, such as my 5 Traditions or 5 Approaches to Qualitative Research book, or my book on the 30 Essential Skills. So I was continually updating my content. Even had my graduate assistants sit in on every class and write down every question that was asked by students so that I could incorporate their ideas into my developing chapters. Next. And one thing about the way I ran my classes, and we've actually used this in workshops up at the University of Michigan now, is to have students bring a research project into the course so that they become invested in actively working on something that would be useful for them in the class. Then I take them through the steps of the research process, step by step, and they work on their part. For example, I'll say, tonight we're going to talk about qualitative research questions, and then I'll have them try writing their questions. After they've written their questions or done one of the activities, then they share it with other students. They may even present to the larger class where they get feedback from a large number of people. And then they also turn over their projects to me towards the end, where I provide written feedback. And this seems to work pretty well to get students involved in research methods and getting them to engage in their own project so that they have a keen interest in coming away from a class with something concrete and tangible. Next. So one thing that I think is a hallmark of my career is moving from methodology to methodology over the years. And I guess what I'm suggesting is I learned a new methodology that was kind of keeping up with the current trends of the day. I started in quantitative research, and I had a strong interest in statistics, and I taught a survey research class. And you see here a little picture of a card sorter machine. And I remember so distinctly how during my graduate training at the University of Iowa, that machine was brought in to campus and placed outside on the lawn. And we were all amazed that we could actually sort IBM cards into different categories and to count numbers. And so that quantitative interest has remained with me over the years, although I'm very keenly aware that we've moved on to regression and logistic regression and structural equation modeling and some of the longitudinal analyses. So it's become very sophisticated. Then when I began teaching qualitative research, I shifted a bit. I'm kind of a second generation qualitative researcher. I was not one of the first individuals in the social sciences, but maybe the first child, if you will, to embrace qualitative research. And recently I wrote this book on the 30 essential skills, which is the most applied book that I've ever written. And this book takes you through many facets of qualitative research, and I discuss exactly how I would approach the topic. And then as I moved towards the late 1980s, I became more and more interested in mixed methods research, and wrote that chapter in the research design book called Combining Qualitative and Quantitative Research. And I think I got more inquiries about that one chapter than any others. And I felt at that time that mixed methods research was going to take off and be an important methodology. Next slide. So I put together here a little timeline that addresses how mixed methods evolved, in my opinion, over the years. And I think this is how a methodology begins to develop in time. First, there are some people that express an interest in this new methodology and are starting to write about it. So between 1985 and 1990, for example, there were 9 people around the world from different disciplines, different fields, that had all come to the point where quantitative and qualitative could be integrated together, brought together in a specific study to study a problem. So there were some founders, and then people started writing specific books on mixed methods. The 1988 book by Tasha Corey and Tedley, and by 2003 we had a major handbook on mixed methods research that brought together the vast topics that were being discussed in mixed methods. So from the founders to now specific books, to the next step was, well, we needed a journal in which to publish our mixed methods studies. So the Journal of Mixed Methods Research was started in 2007. After that, there was interest by the federal government and the funding agencies in promoting mixed methods, and so the best practice guidelines came into the health sciences in 2011. Beyond that, we needed some type of an association to bring together the community members from around the world in mixed methods research. So the Mixed Methods International Research Association was founded in 2013, and it began expanding with regional conferences through 2014. And then the federal government by 2015 was also interested in the specific training of people in this methodology. So a special NIH-funded project began at Harvard and Johns Hopkins and the University of Michigan. And then professional associations became interested in putting forward standards for doing good research using this methodology. So the American Psychological Association has now come up with standards, and more recently the Minority Health Disparities Institute, NIH, has come up with standards. So you can see here, for me, the trajectory of mixed methods, I think, mirrors how I see the development of methodology, from founders to books to journals to federal government involvement to associations and on to particular standards that are developed. Next slide. So what we have in mixed methods today are about 30 books or so, maybe a few more, on mixed methods research. And if you look at this book down on the right-hand side at the bottom, A Concise Introduction to Mixed Methods, I'm kind of proud of that book, that SAGE book, because it can be read in 2 to 3 hours. It gives a person a quick snapshot of what mixed methods research is. And it's being translated, because it's so short, it's being translated into many languages around the world. Next slide. So one thing that I've done too as I've continued to evolve as a methodologist is to choose each year a thematic area of study. And since I've focused primarily on qualitative and mixed methods in recent years, I spent a year looking at research designs. I spent the next year mapping the field of mixed methods research, trying to identify the topics and the areas of interest. I spent the next year talking about the advances in mixed methods research, what were the latest innovations. I spent the next year trying to think about newer types of designs that would emerge. For example, how would you put mixed methods research together with the interest in big data today? And more recently, I've focused on embedding mixed methods within intervention or experimental trials. So I've had a thematic area that's unfolded over time as a methodologist. Next slide. You may be familiar with mixed methods. I know a number of people are on this webinar who have a mixed methods interest and skill set, but I see it as collecting both quantitative and qualitative data, using rigorous procedures, integrating, bringing the two databases together, framing it within a larger mixed methods design, and incorporating theory or a conceptual framework into mixed methods research. Next. So some of the newer things that are coming out that really address the continued evolution of qualitative research as well as mixed methods. I mentioned these guidelines from NIH in 2011, best practices for mixed methods in health sciences. So now health science researchers are actively using mixed methods in many fields in their research. Next slide. And then the training program. So the National Institute of Health funded a training program. It's based out of Johns Hopkins and Harvard and Michigan. And each year we train 14 scholars to be specialized methodologists on their campuses, in their fields, on mixed methods research. This is quite an exciting program of training the next cadre of methodologists. Next. And I'm quite proud of what the American Psychological Association has done recently. They convened a task force last year to develop standards for both qualitative and mixed methods research. We've had quantitative standards over the years, but not qualitative and mixed methods in the American Psychological Association. And so this task force will have a report coming out in the American Psychologist this spring. And next year, 2018, I am told, we will have a new edition of the APA Style Manual. And for the first time in history, there will be a section on qualitative standards as well as mixed method standards. I think this is a major step forward given that students and faculty around the world are using this style manual as a guide for their references and citations. Next. And I mentioned that the Minority Health Disparities Institute at the National Institute of Health has just put together a visioning task force to come up with guidelines on qualitative research and mixed methods research. And it also includes guidelines on some of the latest quantitative approaches, especially some of the new types of intervention trials, experimental trials that are being used. So this is quite an exciting development. Next. And the last development at the federal level is the PCORI group. The PCORI Methodology Committee now will be meeting in the next couple of months to actually discuss how to incorporate qualitative and mixed methods into their guidelines for applications for patient-centered outcome research institute monies. This is the Affordable Care Act monies that have been used in the past few years in the United States. Next. So let me step back for a moment before I take some questions. What have I learned about evolving methodologies? Well, for me personally, it presents new challenges, continual growth, maybe long-term vitality. It just seems to be energizing to be learning a new skill set so that I can say that I've got this toolkit that's very large with many different ways of approaching some of our pressing problems. I'm also quite aware that individuals come along and provide summaries of the field that can be very helpful for you to capture what the latest thinking is on a methodology. I've tried to do that in the mixed methods field with my articles on advancing mixed methods research, but someone needs to catalog new innovations, new techniques, so that when people write projects, they're incorporating the latest ideas. And then finally, I would have to say it's been an amazing journey to live through the methodologies that have developed, from quantitative to qualitative to mixed methods, and some of the others that are developing, such as participatory action research and longitudinal quantitative research. I often think about my grandmother, who passed in 1974, and right before she passed, she said to me, you know, I have lived the most amazing life. When I was a child in the 1880s, 1890s, we didn't even have electricity in our house. We didn't have any of the modern conveniences. And then just the other day, I heard about the man landing on the moon. What an amazing life I've had through advancing technologies. Okay, thank you.
All right, John, thank you so much for that presentation. And what a nice way to end it. Everyone else, please keep those questions coming. We're going to spend the rest of our time, and we'll probably go a little past the 45-minute mark. Hope that's okay with everybody. You don't have to stay on if you've got somewhere else to be. But please do continue to keep those questions coming in the question box on the right side of your screen. And you can also use Twitter. The hashtag that we'll be looking for is SageTalks. It's on your screen in front of you too. Before we really get going, John, I would be remiss if I didn't mention how many people want to use this forum to thank you for your work, John. I've seen just a lot of remarks coming through. People are saying thank you. They're saying that they've learned so much from you. And I just want to be sure that I give a voice to that as the moderator. And John, when you reflect back on your career, I mean, could you ever imagine that your work would impact so many people?
No, I think, you know, it's like anything else you do in the world where you just follow your passion and your interests and hope it lands on kind ears. No, but I think it wasn't until after I wrote that research design book that came out after 1994, I really began thinking to myself as a writer that could offer something to the world. And as the interest in the books came in, it just encouraged me more and more to write more books. So I couldn't have envisioned it when I was in that doctoral program at the University of Iowa, looking at that card sorter machine on the lawn of the University of Iowa.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've definitely made an impact on a lot of people, and many of them are here listening to us right now. So let's get to some of the questions that I've gotten. One of the questions that's come across a few times I've seen is, what is the role of big data in social science research? And how do we better combine traditional research methods with big data?
Yeah, I think that's an important question. And in fact, up at Michigan in our mixed methods program, we've begun discussing the possibility of a workshop that would focus on that topic. Big data often involves, you know, quantitative research, gathering numeric information. But we also need to hear the personal experiences of people. And so for me, it's a natural to bring qualitative into studying big data problems. But that's definitely an unfolding field that I've not ventured into yet, but I see it coming in the near future.
Okay. Another question we've seen a lot of relates to arts-based methodologies.
Yeah.
The question here that I've just gotten, what are arts-based methodologies? Where are they best used in research, particularly relating to equity research?
Yeah. I see arts-based research as a newest innovation in qualitative research. And I think some of the work that Johnny Sedalia has put together and some other people on advancing arts-based approaches is very helpful. I think it has a place in qualitative research to get to that level of personal experiences and performances and the way people talk about their lives. I think it also has a place in mixed methods research where it can be a useful qualitative database that can be combined with quantitative measures. One of these days we'll have books out on and workshops on mixed methods and arts-based educational approaches. But I see it as a conversation largely right now lodged within the qualitative community. And I'd like to expand that into other methodologies. You know, I'd like them to partner with the quantitative methodologist as well as it moves forward.
Great. Here's another question. Because the field of mixed methods continues to evolve, how do you perceive the next generation of mixed methods research designs? They're constantly changing and evolving, and it's difficult to capture the right way to develop some of these advanced mixed methods designs. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Sure. I think it's best stated in Chapter 4 of my new book with Plano Clark on designing and conducting mixed methods research. That chapter addresses what we call complex designs. I think what's happening is that mixed methods, that is the integration of quantitative and qualitative data to best answer research problems, is beginning to be embedded more and more in different designs, methodologies, and theories. And that's the future, I think. For example, how do you use mixed methods research in social network analysis? How do you use it within grounded theory or within participatory action research? How do you use it within an evaluation procedure? And so this is giving mixed methods, I think, added life beyond just a standalone methodology when it begins partnering with other approaches. How do you use mixed methods within geocoding systems, for example? And our Chapter 4 in our book wanders into that arena, raises those questions, presents some possibilities. And I think that is the future of where mixed methods is going, embedding mixed methods within other theories, within other designs, within other procedures and processes like evaluation.
Great. You know, on that note, we've gotten a lot of questions about how you see methodologies developing in the future. So beyond mixed methods, which you just addressed in the previous answer, do you have any other thoughts about how you see methodologies developing in the future?
Well, I think methodologies will develop further in response to societal problems and some of the what some of the writers call the wicked problems afoot in the world right now. You know, how can best be linked to actually solve some of the epidemics that are around the world? How can it best be utilized to address some of the social problems and even political problems and perhaps religious problems that exist in the world? I think it's going out of the academy a bit into the larger society, and I think methodologies are going out not only to larger societies but also into new fields where they may not be present before. So these are some of the developments that I see. I think we'll always hold on to kind of standard ways of doing quantitative research, and some of the, let's say, more conventional ways of doing qualitative research and some of the conventional ways of doing mixed methods. But I think the types of problems that will be addressed will go out into society and probably even more out into the corporate world. In mixed methods, for example, I'm seeing mixed methods being picked up by the corporate world, especially in the marketing area and the management area and in the global research area. So that's how I see methodologies moving forward towards society, out beyond the academy to the corporate and business world.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think technology plays into all of that? We've gotten a few questions about the changing nature of technology, and that might at some point be everything we have. How does technology play into the role of the future of methodologies?
Yeah. Well, I think technology enables, the new technologies today enable us to promote methodologies better than we've ever been able to do in the last 50 years. I often talk about meta-analysis that began in the 60s and 70s. And how was that advanced and developed? Well, there were a few key writers and individuals that presented at conferences and in papers. Contrast that with, say, mixed methods in the last 15 years. It's had the advantage of webinars like this one. It's had the advantage of Facebook and Twitter and all the social media possibilities. It has the the possibility of a large-scale course, a MOOC, has begun to emerge. So mixed methods as a methodology has grown up in the digital social media era, and it's been promoted at a level that probably the early methodologies just didn't have that type of support to build. And so technology, I think, is going to continue to promote the new methodologies that come along. And there will be some that none of us know about right now or have thought about. And all of a sudden, like in 1985, 1990, 9 people began thinking about how could we put quantitative and qualitative together. Well, there's going to be innovators in methodology, I think, that will be coming forth that, with new ideas that will be quite exciting in the future.
Mm-hmm. Great. Switching gears a bit, I'd like to address some practical inquiries that we've gotten. One question that someone submitted is, what do you think the best time is in a semester for a student to do a research project? Because this individual posits that it takes your average student sometimes longer than the course of the whole semester. So where do you like to introduce the research project? Or where would you advise one to introduce the research project for their students?
Well, of course, I can't tell people how to teach their course or how students can relate to what the instructors have to offer. But you saw when I talked about qualitative research that I actually have students bring an idea project into the class. And the very first night of the class, we're beginning to develop it. And while they may only end up at the end of the semester in that qualitative class with a plan for a project, that's a good start, that they can then carry it on over the next semesters of work. So I think starting as soon as possible, even right at the first class of the semester, is what I do, and it seems to be a procedure that gets students engaged immediately and gets them started. And it also begins to desensitize people about how complex research is. Research needs to be fun, it needs to be evolving, it needs to be 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. So I try to encourage that positive viewpoint about doing scholarly work right from the very first class session.
Well, that's great. And along those lines, do you have any other kind of tips that you may suggest to others who are teaching maybe students doing research for the first time? I know that's kind of always of interest to those professors who struggle with student engagement or maybe even student intimidation about doing their own research.
Yeah, I think I would suggest to professors that they bring their own research in, that they're passionate about, that they're excited about, and that will tend to rub off on the students. Share your journal articles. When I was writing that 30 Essentials book in my qualitative class, I was actively sharing with the students what some of the chapters were that I was writing and how I was using their feedback to improve the chapters. So I think that's a big thing, to not keep research as separate from teaching, but to integrate it right into your own teaching and to bring in your own examples.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. Is there any particular software that you find useful to you in your work, qualitative software specifically?
Well, in my research offices over the last few years, we've used several packages. The MaxQDA package has been very popular. We've used that. I know the MaxQDA developers, and I know that organization quite well, and they now have a pull-down menu on mixed methods in their software program. But we've also used Atlas TI. We've used NVivo. Some people are using Deduce out of UCLA. The Provalis software out of Montreal is also useful. I personally find that these software packages are very similar, and I know that software developers are watching each other carefully, and so try a demo would be my recommendation of one of the software packages. You can go online and get the demo. Try it for 30 days and use it with your data and see if you appreciate it and enjoy using it. And there's not one package, but there are several that I've used. And I've been writing with the MaxQDA people a lot in recent years. Mm-hmm. So I like their work.
Great. What do you see as the main problem with small sample sizes in qualitative research?
I don't see any problems. You know, in my book, Qualitative Inquiry, The 5 Approaches, one of the most controversial sections in that book, and I can't tell you how many emails I've received all around the world on this, it's a section where I talk about what the sample size should be. And I say something like, you know, if you're doing grounded theory, I want a sample size of 20 to 30. If you're doing a case study, usually 3 or 4 cases for comparison. If you're doing a narrative study, 1, maybe 2 individuals. So I see sample size in qualitative research related to the type of design that you're using. How did I come up with those numbers? I just started looking at dozens of studies. I looked at dozens of narrative studies and began thinking about, well, what was the sample size that these people were using as they conducted narrative research? That's one way that I came up with those numbers. The other way is to think in terms of this qualitative term called saturation, where you've gathered quite a bit of data, and if you gather more information, you're really not adding to your understanding of codes or themes. And so there's no sample size that's mandated. However, I think looking at how within a particular approach to qualitative research the size is being used is the best strategy.
Great. I have a question about how tactics or techniques that you might use to reduce interviewer bias and ensuring the quality of questions in interviews. Do you have any tactics you would recommend?
Yeah. Pilot test your interview and listen very carefully to what the interviewee has to say about how the interview went. I think that's extremely helpful. I don't think we can ever eliminate interviewer bias entirely, but especially in qualitative research, you can keep your questions as open-ended as possible without asking leading questions, without giving responses. I notice when I worked with the people at the Gallup Corporation who do a lot of interviewing, you know, they are really trained to not say very much, to simply ask the question and listen carefully for the responses, and if possible, then use some probes to get the person to talk further. So these are some of the strategies, and I talk about some of those strategies in my chapter on interviewing in my 30 Essentials book.
Oh, great. All right. One last question that I'd like to end on. What advice would you have for somebody who's just beginning their research journey, whether it's focused on qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods? What advice would you have for that person?
Oh, could we go to another question? That's too hard. No, I'll answer that.
Thank you.
What advice would I have? What was helpful for me is probably what I can speak to best. I just felt that I needed to become a better writer. So I started reading all those books on writing. Then I remember as I worked on my dissertation, I ran into this I talked to this very well-known chemist, and he said, John, in writing your dissertation, you are simply learning the research process. If you happen to have something that provides some profound new knowledge to the field, that's great, but it's just learning the research process. And then he said, and just take it one step at a time. If you work on a research project on a regular basis, maybe even every day, especially, for example, if you're writing a thesis or a dissertation, it will accumulate over time. Also, be playful with it. There's some great playful parts. For you, it might be collecting data. For another person, it might be data analysis. For me, it's, you know, how can I put this story together of what I learned from my research? I'm composing a new story that I want to put out there to the world. And so be playful and have fun with these various parts. It's not rocket science. In fact, the best research is very simple and very straightforward and very clear. And when you read that published journal article that's well done, it reads very quickly. And so these are some of the suggestions I would give to a new researcher.
Well, thank you so much. I think that is a perfect note to end this webinar on. Thank you so much for answering all those questions, John.
Sure.
Everyone else, oh yeah, thank you. Everyone else still on the line, thank you so much for hanging with us. That's about all the time we have, and if you're interested in purchasing one of John's books, feel free to use that code on the screen in front of you. It's Creswell20 on sagepub.com, and you can purchase one of John's books at a 20% discount. That code is going to be good through the end of the month. It's 2 weeks from today. If you are an instructor and you're considering one of John's books for use in your course, feel free to request a copy at sagepub.com as well. Finally, we just want to announce that in the near future, John and other SAGE authors will be contributing to MentorSpace, a new hub within SAGE's online research community method space. And the site will offer a special focus on the how-to of the research process. So if you enjoyed yourself today, watch methodspace.com for more information. Thanks again to everybody for joining us, and a very special thank you to John Creswell. Please be on the lookout for an email that includes a link to view the entire webinar. And stay connected with us on our blog, Sage Connection, for information about upcoming webinars, and make sure to follow us on Twitter at @sage_methods. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.